John Werner, our member. Here's the other dip into our membership for this. John, not only did he get today's speaker before retiring from the Boeing Company, he also made things happen for Phil Condit. I asked myself, who could better introduce our speaker? John. When I asked him, he said he'd be pleased. John was doing engineering work on the SST when he first met Phil. With a general management background, he got promoted to president of Boeing Computer Services. Next thing he knew, he was Phil's chief administrative officer. That made him the bad boy who had to find the city and the building for them to move their headquarters to. How did an engineer end up in all those jobs? I think the answer was not engineering. It was about leadership. Now to hear about leadership, please welcome John Werner to introduce you to today's speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Great. Thank you. Okay, you have a resume about Phil in front of you, and it doesn't list his accomplishments, and we don't have time to do that today, but let me just mention a few things that are relevant. One thing that he's passionate about, he's an Eagle Scout like our President John is, and he continues today to be a leader in the Scout movement. The other thing relevant to our Business Mentors program, he has an endowed chair at the UW Foster School of Business. When he became president of Boeing, shortly after that, he formed what's now known as the Boeing Leadership Center, and that sent a message to all of us who worked for him what we had to focus on. So you'll hear a lot about that today. My last 9 years at the company, I worked directly for Phil. I was somewhat quasi-chief of staff for him, and part of my job was to understand him well. He never fired me, so I guess I did okay at that. So I'll tell you what I learned about him. One, he's an absolute visionary and strategic thinker and is able to communicate those notions to many, many people. He's also a very humble person, and that means he's a great listener, and that's one of the best attributes a leader can have. To give you some insight, I'm just going to tell you a little personal story. He became president in 1992, and shortly after that, he asked me to be president of Boeing Computer Services. And so in 1993, the spring of 1993, he said, John, come over to my office and I want to talk to you about your new job. I'd been there about a month, so I had this big notebook full of all of the data on Boeing Computer Services and what our challenges and opportunities are. And he looked at that, and I sat down, and he said, John, what's your Myers-Briggs personality profile? And I said, I don't know what that is. And so he explained it to me. It gives an understanding of how you are perceived by others and how you think and all of that. Some of you may know about this. And I said, Phil, do we aeronautical engineers do that? And he said, no, we leaders do. Okay. So at that time, that began what I call my postgraduate education for the next 9 years in leadership at the hands of Phil Condit. And that education continues today. So Phil, if you'll take the podium, I'll sit down and take notes.
So here's my challenge. I've been working on a syllabus for a leadership course, undergraduate leadership course, 56 class hours plus homework and reading assignments. And I'm going to try to get that in about 12 and a half to 15 minutes so that you can ask a few questions. So hold on, here we go. I want to talk about what I call leadership myths, things that are believed by a lot of people that I just don't think are really true. The first one is that leaders are born, not made. And there are a lot of people that believe this very deeply. I feel that every one of us is born with talents. Some of them physical, some of them mental. But we all have potential talents. It takes teaching, coaching, mentoring, word you've heard before today, and a great deal of practice to turn those potentials, those talents, to a practical use. It's true if you want to be a swimmer. It's true if you want to be a leader. Now, if we taught swimming like we teach leadership most of the time, it would look something like this. We'd line everybody up, and without a lesson, we'd just push them in the pool. Some of them would sink immediately, and we would look down and say, that's really too bad. Guess they just didn't have what it takes to be a swimmer. Some would push other people down to stay up and think that that's what it was all about. Some would begin to actually paddle around and learn to swim. But the chances that this method of teaching would produce world-class swimmers is extremely small. What does it really take? What it takes is careful teaching, great coaching, lots of practice if you're going to make that talent worthwhile. So point number one, leaders are born, not made, is incorrect. It takes good teaching and a lot of hard work. Myth number two, leaders know all of the answers. Now this is a double problem because it is the result of the way leaders frequently behave. You certainly don't want to be seen as not knowing the answer. So frequently leaders make it up or do some other strange things. And the expectation of people in the organization. I mean, after all, how did you ever get promoted if you don't know the answers? And we frequently select and promote people who are brilliant, who are very capable at what they do, and we promote them into opportunities for which they have no training. And then we wonder why they don't do well. Back to item number one. And as John mentioned, this sort of leads to my second conclusion. You must learn to listen. You have to learn to listen. And then you have to listen to learn. Listening is not an easy thing to do. It is not a natural act. Most of us in a conversation are busy thinking about what we're going to say while the other person is talking, and we're waiting for them to stop talking so that we can say what we want to say. That is not listening. Let me tell you a story, a real story. Longer ago than I would like to remember, about 27 years ago, we were at a major U.S. airline. And we were there because that airline had bought a new aircraft type, and they were going to select the decor, the colors and the materials that were going to go into that airplane. And we went down with lots of color boards and fabric swatches and pictures of what these interiors might look like. As it happened, the CEO of that airline was detained, but the rest of the senior staff was all there at the start of the meeting. And so they walked around, looked at the various color boards, looked at the materials, had a really good conversation. They all agreed that one of those was by far and away the best interior, no question. Then one of the people said, you know what? There are 3 different seat covers in that particular arrangement, and this is going to cause us unending problems because seat covers get damaged and they have to be replaced, and that means that at every single line station you've got to have multiple different seat covers because you don't know which one's going to get damaged. And so we're going to end up storing and moving and transporting all these different seat covers. They talked some more about it, and they finally settled on a compromise. Didn't look quite as good, but it solved this logistics problem. At the end of that discussion, the CEO arrived. Without stopping, without having any other conversation, he began to walk around the room and look at these materials. And he stopped at the one that they had all agreed was the best looking and said, this is the one. This is what this airline needs. This is the right interior. What do you guys think? Now you can guess what the answer was. The answer was, you bet, boss, right away. You got it, boss. Perfect answer. Now the story doesn't happen to end there, because right after that, his wife came. And he said to her, look at the one we've chosen, isn't it spectacular? And she said, it's going to be a logistics nightmare. And a little more discussion occurred, and he then settled on the one that the group had, in fact, looked at. And he said, this is really important. I think this is what we really ought to do. What do you guys think? You bet, boss. Right on, boss. What he was missing was all of the knowledge, all the capability, all the intelligence of those other people, his senior officers. It is hard and it is critical to learn to listen. The minute the leader states an opinion, you've biased the answer. You got to listen. My next one is leadership occurs only at the top. Somehow when we talk about leadership, we talk about the person at the top of the organization. In business school, you look at cases and they very frequently are about what did the CEO do? What did the CEO think? What were the challenges facing the CEO? What any great organization has is leadership at all levels. Leaders on the factory floor, leaders in the finance organization, leaders everywhere in the organization. Now, this is not to say that what we're after is anarchy, everybody doing their own thing wherever they want to do it, but rather that everybody is working and aligned to the same goal, but taking the initiative where they are. I have been amazed how many times you can walk out, in our case, onto the factory floor, and you can immediately see where the leaders are. This shop over here has quality that is improving dramatically, costs that are coming down. That first-level supervisor, that leader, has engaged that crew, and they are doing dramatic and wonderful things. 15 feet away is another shop and another leader going nowhere in a big hurry. And what it is a lack of leadership. Leadership occurs at all levels. The real key is to aspire to lead wherever you are, whatever you're doing. The last of my leadership myths for today is that leaders just really need to focus on the numbers. The old adage, what gets measured is what gets done. Well, the fact is, what gets measured does get done. But leadership is about people. It is about inspiring people to do more than they can even imagine their capability to do. It is the leader's responsibility to paint a compelling picture of where you're going, whether it's at that first level or higher up. Where are we trying to go? What are we trying to accomplish? What's going to happen when we do these things? Why do we want to do them? That compelling picture from the leader is what aligns everyone. Another sort of piece to this same item, I've always been struck by the attitude that is inherent in Southwest Airlines. And it comes from the fact that the adage they have from the hiring side is hire for attitude, train for skill. What you want is attitude. You can't train for attitude. You want people that are excited about being there, that want to accomplish good things, that have a sense of humor. They have displayed that, and it has been a key element in their success. Leadership is about getting the best performance from a team of people. Maybe the most fundamental thing that I've learned along the way was embodied in a little pin that I was given by a friend of mine, a teacher. And that pin said, none of us is as smart as all of us. What leadership is about is capturing the capabilities, the intelligence, the attitude, the spirit that people bring to an organization. None of us is as smart as all of us. So, summary, real quick. 4 myths. Leaders are born, not made. The reality is it takes great coaching, great mentoring, lots of practice to make a leader. Leaders know all the answers. None of us is as smart as all of us. Leadership only occurs at the top. Aspire to lead where you are. And leaders just focus on the numbers. Leadership is about getting the best performance out of a team of people. That's what an organization is. There's a lot about leadership. And maybe I can say it best in none of us is as smart as all of us. Thank you.
Let me get the question started. You did a great job. Thank you.
13 minutes.
This is a leader who is talking there. It shows now how to time it out. So, short questions, please. Raise your hand. We've got the video going, so we need to have the mic in front of you. Wait for the mic. That way, we don't have to repeat the question.
Phil, give us a name of either a great mentor or protege, and what was special about them if you can't talk about Jim?
Great mentor. I had a professor in graduate school who did 2 things that were extremely important and probably did more to set me on the path that I ended up following than anybody else. The first thing he did was he had a seminar Monday afternoon. This was 1965. I can still remember at least 5 of those seminars, which tells you something about it. They were stories. He told stories about what happened and why it happened, and they stuck. I learned something very deep about the power of storytelling and why it was so important. The other thing that he did was I was doing really well, and I was headed to start my PhD work. I'd gotten my master's degree, and he called me into the office, and he said, "You need to get out of here." Well, you know, when your advisor and the chairman of the department says you ought to get out of here, it bothers you a bit. And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "You need to go make things." I said, "What do you think I ought to do?" He said, "Well, if I were you, I'd go to work for the Boeing Company." The lesson there to me was really important, and that is, again, encouragement. Do where your passion is. Do what you have the passion for, and always learn. Tremendous impact.
Have one over here.
Phil, you mentioned a lot about listening as a part of leadership and just in general. So from your experience, were you always a great listener, or did you have to learn, and if so, how?
No, I think it is something very definitely learned. And as I mentioned, it's really hard. You've got to, John's heard me do this a bunch of times. I talked about aggressive listening. The idea that you're going to focus on what that other person is saying, not trying to prepare your response, but what are they really saying and why are they saying it? Just another quick example around that as a leader. If you're around a conference table and you're trying to make a decision, it's very tempting for the leader to say, hey, guys, I think we ought to do this. What do you think? And it immediately stops the conversation. Another thing I found was there's always a person who's the next most powerful person in the room. They almost always sit to the right of the leader. Somehow that works. If you turn to them and say, okay, what do you think, John? And that person says something, you've now killed the conversation from almost everybody else because they have to make this decision, do I disagree or not with this other person that is significant? And I would try, it's not easy, I would try to remember to look around the room and start at different places. What do you think? Tell me what you think. Let's just talk about this for a little bit. We're not voting yet. Tell me what you think. I would say 95% of the time, the group actually would settle pretty quickly on an answer if you let them engage in that process. But it requires really thinking hard about the fact that you've got to listen. Because you do have an opinion. You're not without one.
Thanks, Phil. Skip Roland, downtown Rotary. A quick comment. I'd like to thank you very much for your leadership at Boeing. We've been a Boeing family since 1967. Nothing but on-time takeoff, so it's really wonderful for us. So thank you. We have students here, as you know, from the University of Washington, and they're in a marketing class. Bill Bradford is one of our founders, Michael Bishaw, program director, illustrious program director. I think they would like to know who some of the authors are that guided your thinking towards leadership. As marketers, they're leaders. Thank you, sir.
Some of the authors. I'm going to watch John, or you might want to watch John while I say this. Reading frustrates me deeply. Because I learn by conversing. I want to talk about things. And I start reading, and immediately I say, what are you trying to say here? And, well, you can't call the author up. So, John got these assignments, which was, John, go read this book. And then come talk to me. So he and I could have a conversation. There are a number of people out there. Ram Shriram is one that I've seen. Now, Ram came and talked to us, so I could have this conversation. Noel Tishy, those are the ones that jump out that have thought deeply about how businesses work and how leadership works.
Asante has a question for you, Phil.
Hi, Phil. You're lucky. You have mentors. Your mentors seek you out. But I wonder, for a lot of young people in this room, they might not have mentors. So what do? Do you go and seek mentors yourself? Is that appropriate?
The answer is absolutely yes. And there are two ways of doing this, and one of which I approve of and one of which I don't approve of. I had a lot of people come to me and say, I would like your advice on this subject. What they were really doing was saying, I would like you to notice me and advance me in my career. That's the one I didn't like. There are others who are genuinely interested, and at the Leadership Center, I could tell immediately who they were. They would ask really good questions, and you could sit down and talk to them. I think it is the responsibility of each individual to look for people, to find people to talk to really engage in conversation. And this is not necessarily a sort of a one-on-one unique relationship, although it can be. There's something to learn from this person, there's something to learn from that person, and you want to engage in those conversations. You want to watch people. I learned a lot from people whose management style I did not agree with, and I learned a lot from people whose management style I did agree with. But you can learn from both. And so there's mentoring going on. Some of it is just observation, just watching.
Management gurus kind of go back and forth about the importance of charisma as a leadership trait. What do you think?
It's delightful if you have that thing that captures an audience. It's wonderful. But to me, it's like one of the talents I mentioned. We're all born with talents. And what you've got to do is capitalize on the ones that you have. And if you're a charismatic speaker, great. If you're not, understand that you're not and figure out what you're going to do. John mentioned one of the things I think I do well. I think about the future and strategic issues well. I'm not very good on day-to-day stuff. I'm just not. So I tried to make sure I always had somebody next to me who had that skill. To use a sports analogy, you know, I knew in high school that I was never going to be a world-class quarterback. I can't run and I can't throw. Other than that, I've got all the attributes that are needed. And so I was a center. I learned that I could center a football, do long snaps, and other people couldn't. And so you're always trying to build a team that has in it this wonderful diversity of capabilities. You want to find people, not a whole bunch of people who look like you or think like you, but people who have different capabilities and different skills. And so now back to the charisma. If you don't have it, find somebody on your team that can be that inspiration to the group. If you do, great. But it's no different than the other skills.
Our last one, a short one, Bill Smead.
You've at the ranch at Boeing a few times on the next generation aircraft. What advice would you have for Steve Ballmer right now?
Our business was really, in my view, very unique in that you always have to be cognizant of the time frame in which you have to operate. And in our case, we're dealing with products that are 50-year products, 50 to 70-year products. So you're trying to think out 50 to 70 years. Software right now is still moving a lot faster, so that he's got to think in a much more compressed way. I think the challenge of any great company, be it Microsoft or General Electric or Boeing or go down that list, is you've always got to be thinking about where you need to go, not where you are. A lot of great companies got stalled because they were doing really good where they were and not thinking about where they had to go.
Beautiful job. Thanks, Phil. Thanks for your leadership comments and myths for us and for our Foster Business School visitors and the mentors and businesses we showcased today. Always great being with you at the Rotary. Thanks for sharing. We're adjourned.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health,